Mayor Richard J. Daley was resolute in 1975 when faced with the prospect of losing the Chicago Bears to the northwest suburb of Arlington Heights. Quote, "They can use the name Arlington Heights Bears, but they'll never use the name of Chicago if I'm the mayor." The old man was playing hardball, so to speak, and it worked. The Bears stayed in Chicago and played at Soldier Field, which before completely falling apart was renovated in 2002 in a deal cut by the old man's son, Richard M. Daley, to keep the Bears from moving out of town again. And now another mayor, this one not named Daley, is facing the prospect of losing the NFL's charter franchise to the suburbs. Mayor Brandon Johnson teamed up with Bears president Kevin Warren in proposing a spot just to the south of Soldier Field on the lakefront. It's a problematic site that would almost certainly face a lawsuit from Friends of the Parks, and one where state lawmakers have said they refuse to open up the checkbook and help pay for it. For a while, Warren wouldn't entertain the notion that the Bears were looking anywhere else than the lakefront. But in recent weeks, he's appeared to change his mind about Arlington Heights.
The McCaskey family, led by George, to have the foresight to purchase that land in Arlington Heights, but to be able to find 326 acres that close to a wonderful city is difficult to do. I don't know if it exists anywhere in the country.
So now, can Johnson pull a Daley out of his playbook and play hardball on the Bears? Why not issue the same threat? Look, I get that fans will follow the team wherever they go. They could build the stadium in Rantoul and it'll sell if the team is good. But there's a measure of civic pride in knowing that all of Chicago's major professional sports teams play within the city limits. What a shame to lose that designation. And Mayor, there is a spot on the lakefront for the Bears, one that they can build on without the threat of a lawsuit. It's right here, the former Michael Reese Hospital site, owned now by Farpoint Properties and CEO Scott Goodman. He is heavily core to the team and presented his own stadium plans on the site. And guess what? Lawmakers might put some taxpayer skin in the game, too, as House Speaker Chris Welch explained to me earlier this year.
They chose a site like Michael Reese, which that's a neighborhood, Bronzeville, that can certainly use some great economic development. That's a different conversation. The state, has a road fund that we could probably help with building roadways or improving the roadways around the area. That's a totally different conversation than what's being asked right now.
So the ball is in your court, Mayor. Every pundit in the local sports world believes the deal is all but done in Arlington Heights, but it's the fourth quarter. There's less than a minute on the clock. The Bears have the ball on their own 5-yard line. Can Mayor quarterback a stunning come-from-behind victory to hit pay dirt at Michael Reese Hospital? If not, Mr. Caleb Williams, number 18, who you see there, will be hoisting the Super Bowl trophy one day for the Arlington Heights Bears. And that's our opening shot.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
It's a tool that stays in the toolbox until we need it.
Could Chicago resort to snap curfews to quell teen violence downtown? We get into the debate. Plus, the future of CPS now that labor strife with CTU has been resolved for now. And the owner of a popular Riverwalk spot speaks out after the city yanks his license.
This is Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
All right, welcome to Paris on Politics, where we go behind the headlines and beyond the spin. As the weather gets warmer, the threat of disruptive teen activity in the Loop grows. One alderman has been calling for a curfew to quell these gatherings that sometimes turn into gun violence. And now he says there's a compromise to allow for police to declare spot curfews at any time. Will that work? Joining me is the sponsoring alderman of that proposal, 2nd Ward's Brian Hopkins, and via Zoom, 40th Ward Alderman Andre Vasquez. Thanks, both of you, for being here. So as I understand, Alderman Hopkins, under this compromise, police could declare a curfew at any time, anywhere in the city?
Yes, exactly. It's citywide, and unlike my previous proposal to change the time from 10 p.m. to 8 p.m., this time will be determined by the circumstances. If you have a large gathering that's out of control at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you can declare a curfew for unaccompanied minors at that specific time in that specific location.
So how would that work, though? How do you get the message out to declare a curfew?
Well, there's two ways to do it. We have the superintendent, who is empowered to declare a teen curfew in anticipation of an event. For example, we see social media postings curfews. Come to Millennium Park this Saturday, meet at 6 p.m. We can declare a teen curfew in effect for that moment days in advance when we have advance warning, and in which case we'll do all kinds of notification. You've seen the email that goes out to CPS parents, other means using social media to put the word out that we're simply not going to let the teen gathering take place. If, on the other hand, we have no warning whatsoever, and that's what the case was just a few weeks ago, where about 300 teens got off the red line in the course of about 45 minutes and congregated in Streeterville. We didn't know it was happening until it was already in progress. The district commander on the ground can declare a curfew in effect based on what he sees and what he observes for a specific period of time, again, just in that neighborhood.
All right, 40th Ward Alderman Andre Vasquez, is this an idea that you're prepared to support?
I think I've got questions on it, and I do really appreciate that our colleague, Chairman Hopkins, has kind of been working to figure out what right could look like. I think the questions I have, first and foremost, is what the officers feel they can't do currently that a curfew imposition would empower them to do. Meaning, if someone is behaving in a way that's reckless, police should be able to address that already. So, I think we'll learn in a hearing. My concern is that they'll use it in a way that could profile, right? That you're not going to see this in Wrigleyville when someone's taking over a street. It'll be when you see, black and brown kids in downtown. And when we think about why so many kids are downtown, it's because they're trying to find places to actually entertain themselves, to congregate, and we don't have enough of them in Chicago and across the city for people to do so.
All right, you brought up an important point. Alderman Hopkins, what can police not do now that they need more tools to be able to accomplish?
In any one of these mass teen takeover events, there's a number of crimes being committed: disorderly conduct, reckless conduct, retail theft, aggravated battery, assault, blocking traffic. There's a long list of things that police can move in to make arrests. The point of having a curfew is we would rather not arrest 200 14-year-olds. If we have a way to have police move in, quell the disturbance, break it up, and remove those kids for their own safety without arresting them, that is a vastly superior alternative to moving in and making mass arrests of a bunch of juveniles.
All right, let's hear from Mayor Brandon Johnson, who was asked whether he would support this compromise proposal the other day. Let's take a listen.
There has to be ongoing conversations, right? Because all stakeholders get to play a part in the direction of how we create accountability and safety. Look, nothing's more important to me as the mayor of the city of Chicago than the overall safety of all of our residents. And so that's why this is yet another example of all voices coming together to put forth ideas so that we can come to a reasonable solution.
Alderman Vasquez, are there other ideas you have to come to a reasonable solution? As we've seen, as the weather gets warm, we see these groups gathering downtown.
Yeah, and I think because Chairman Hopkins kind of had this conversation about these adjustments, it led to me talking to some other colleagues about, well, what do we do in the moment that wouldn't be the solution? And what was raised up, which I think is an opportunity, is the groups that already do violence prevention work. That in effect, they could occupy the space in a way that I think some of the curfew conversation envisions, but have it be someone who's not viewed as police, where they might be on the ground the way they do in other neighborhoods and create the kind of dispersal or get ahead of things before they can get to a situation that none of us want to see. So there might be other parties that could do the same work and not have it feel as martial law, I guess, as this might feel, depending how it's implemented.
That's an interesting way to put it, Alderman Hopkins. Is this kind of like martial law?
No, absolutely not. I mean, this would only be applied when absolutely necessary. No one wants to, have some kind of draconian measure where we want to discourage teenagers from coming downtown. Literally no one wants that. That's a straw man argument that's being created to just oppose this, and there's no logic or rationale behind it. We want teenagers to come downtown. What we don't want is the kind of violence that has been associated with these teen takeover events. We just had a 14-year-old shooting shoot a 15-year-old. 3 weeks before that, we had a 15-year-old shoot a tourist. That is unacceptable, and we need to use law enforcement tactics to intervene when the streets get absolutely out of control and the mayhem starts to gain momentum. We have to stop it, and we need police.
And I want to ask you real quick, because tonight we see fencing going up in Streeterville. What's that all about?
Yeah, that's an experimental tactic that the district commander wanted to try, because we've had teen takeovers that started in Ogden Plaza near the Sheraton Hotel on Columbus Drive. And you'll get 200 teens that'll stay in that open space, and then all of a sudden they'll move out and take over the street. They'll take over Illinois Street, or they'll take over Fairbanks. So to put up the fencing is to basically prevent them from easily moving a mass number of humanity into traffic and taking over the roadway. We'll see if it works. It's a crowd control tactic.
And that'll be up over the weekend?
It'll be up over the weekend.
All right,
yeah.
Alderman Vasquez, Alderman Hopkins has told me that there are 30 co-sponsors of this ordinance. Is this something that you believe will move, or is it going to be tweaked or needs more discussion?
I mean, I think it's clear, and again, the council is talking and trying to figure out what a solution can look like. And so I do think that everyone is invested in making sure the city is safer. You know, I know it may feel like a straw man argument, but I think those of us who raise up concerns we don't know what the intent of someone who's using it might be, right? We're living in a country now where we're watching laws that have been written in the past and not envisioned being used in this manner. And so I think some of the concerns are just what could happen in worst case scenarios. And I say that because it's not that the questions that Alderman Hopkins brings up aren't valid. And I think the conversation might lead to a solution we can all wrap our heads around and agree potentially. But it's going to take a lot more hearings and conversations to figure that out.
All right, Alderman Vasquez, Alderman Hopkins, thank you both for joining us on this conversation. The labor strife between Chicago Public Schools and the teachers union is over for now. Teachers overwhelmingly ratified a new contract that gives them 4 to 5% raises and more classroom prep time, among other things. But how will the struggling district pay for it? And what is the future of leadership as fired CEO Pedro Martinez will step away in a matter of months? We're joined now by the Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson's Chief of Staff, Cristina Pacione-Zayas, who's in charge of keeping all the trains running on time for the city here. Thank you so much for joining us. So CPS has said they can pay for this year, but what about the 3 years after that? What are they going to do?
Yeah, so essentially CPS needs to come up with a strategy to think through about how they're going to have this sustainable revenue source. There's opportunities obviously with expiring TIFs and, you know, the original taxing bodies that TIFs used to extract from now having additional dollars going into their coffers. But they're going to also have to think through a Springfield strategy to figure out, as they become a more independent body, how do they square away their pensions and the costs for that, as well as paying for, you know, the MABF pension payment.
This is the $175 million that they're having the city pay instead.
Correct. Now, mind you, that is only $175 million of a $550 million payment.
So they're responsible for that other part of it.
No, the city pays
is already
for the
paying that.
entire amount, and through the discussions and conversations, there was a ramp to get up to the $550 million as they became more independent.
I know you've been intricately involved in this process. You've been frustrated with CEO Pedro Martinez. Does he get credit for landing this deal that teachers like?
Yeah, I would actually say that the deal landed in spite of him. The mayor thought it was really important to bring everybody together, to ensure that they saw, you know, where there were points of intersection, where there were points that, you know, were non-economical, but they could eventually come to some type of compromise and agreement. That's precisely why he called everybody together to say, hey, there are 3 things. One of them only has some fiscal implications, but the other ones we all agree will have a better impact on our schools and our children, and obviously the conditions, working conditions for our educators.
I know you were in that meeting, so you're saying do you think he was impeding this process? Because he'll say he was up against it. The CTU, the mayor, they seem to be on the same side, the school board, and he says he's protecting the interests of taxpayers.
So I would say this: they had some agreements in terms of, wanting to have, longer prep periods, but obviously the details and the nuances needed to get, worked out, right? We also wanted to have smaller class sizes, and what would be the triggers in which we would have additional educators in the room, particularly in our youngest grades, which that makes the greatest difference, right? But then also there were a lot of issues and nuances about coming to agreement with respect to librarians and with respect to having nurses and social workers every single day. As a CPS parent, I can tell you that is a game changer. When you have a consistent support staff in your schools to be able to provide those wraparound supports. I mean, those are major wins, but when it came down to it, every single, obstacle that was presented, it pretty much, he put up a front, and we had to really chip away at that to land the plane.
And, he has been fired by the board with that 6-month notice, which has a couple more months left. A lot of chatter about the future of CPS. The mayor's been asked whether or not he wants to appoint you to that position, or at least interim superintendent / CEO, permanent / superintendent CEO. Is this something that's being discussed?
No, at this time, I'm still the chief of staff. I will continue to serve the mayor as directed.
And is it something you would be interested in if it was presented to you?
I'm interested in having a CEO or a superintendent that fully understands the vision of the mayor, and that is to have a well-resourced public school, neighborhood school in every single community. I'm interested in making sure that we invest in a sustainable community school model that anchors our schools in our communities and have wraparound supports and extend the walls into communities. So whoever that person is, I hope they fully understand what they're signing up for.
But it does sound like you understand all those things. Let me ask you, so we just talked about the curfew issue, and this is something you're involved in as well. What do you think about that, these snap curfews, and the concern that maybe it seems like martial law a little bit?
So, at this time, all of that is under consideration and discussion, right? But the mayor is not for just moving the challenges around from one neighborhood to the next. While public safety is absolutely a top priority, investing in young people and making sure that they have safe spaces at all times is paramount. I come from a generation where we used to have Boys and Girls Clubs and YMCAs everywhere. In fact, I grew up in the club. My parents met at the club. And that really made a significant difference in terms of the opportunities that young people have. This is precisely why the mayor wants to continue to invest in youth employment, particularly the peacekeeper model that Good Kids Mad City has brought to bear, and then on top of it, the community violence intervention interrupters.
And I was going to say that the president has threatened to cut funding for a lot of those things, and that's another thing that I know that you're going to have to deal with. Cristina Pacione-Zayas, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
The warmer weather also means Chicago's Riverwalk is just about ready for business, but could politics put a damper on all the Riverwalk revelry? The owner of one popular riverfront spot says his permit was yanked without explanation, and now he's fighting back. Joining us is Robert Gomez, owner of the Beat Kitchen, which until this year operated along the river. Robert Gomez, thanks for joining us. We should mention you own several other spots, including Subterranean and Beat Kitchen, and then a spot on Navy Pier. So you had this location on the Riverwalk for several years. It was profitable, and then it got taken away from you. What happened?
Well, there was a 5-year lease. We weren't able to operate the first 2 years, and then so we were there for 3 years, and the lease was up, so it was up for renewal. And so they do an application process. So obviously we applied, and it was one other applicant. But this was it was a year ago that this started, and it started late, but it sat locked, shuttered for an entire year without explanation.
It just sat shuttered. You were not allowed to open.
Correct.
And they didn't tell you why?
Well, because the process wasn't. The reality is they weren't ready for the process, and it took way longer than it should have, and so the year just got wasted.
And now they finally did that application process, and from what I understand, they just went with somebody else.
That's correct. They went with the other applicant.
And do you know who that is and why they might have gone that way?
They don't disclose any of that until the deal is signed and delivered, so that there's nothing I can do about it at that point. So I don't know what the issues were, if there were any, because they didn't tell me of any issues prior. And they don't disclose who the other applicant is. They don't disclose who the selection committee is.
Well, we should say there is a selection committee here in the Department of Fleet and Facility Management that determines who gets to go in the Riverwalk.
Correct.
And you're saying you did a Freedom of Information request to find out who's on this committee.
Correct.
What's their criteria, and what did you hear back?
They said they cannot disclose that because they can't disclose who's on the committee out of fear that people would be able to influence those committee members. But they don't tell you how many. We don't know the history, meaning what background do they have to help with this type of analysis. And the most difficult part about it is that there's no oversight. There's no governing body to say if you have a disagreement with their decision, they don't just decide who goes on the Riverwalk. They decide policies like who gets signage. Like I never got signage even though I appealed. And there's no one to appeal to say, wait a minute, why are we being treated differently? There's no governing body to go to and say, can somebody look into this because it doesn't seem right.
All right, well, speaking of governing bodies, that's the paper we just picked up. I did ask the city for a statement on this, and they did say, quote, unfortunately, this applicant was not selected for a renewed concession agreement based on assessment by the evaluation committee. And they say that this is, there we go, the purpose of the RFP process is to ensure that Chicagoans benefit from a competitive bidding process that takes into account a number of factors, so on and so forth. Does this kind of satisfy some of the questions you have?
No, not at all. Why is no one being held accountable for keeping that location closed for a year? I lost the first 2 years. The first year was because they were not ready. And it's just like this process.
How much money does that mean? This was money that you had planned for your business?
Absolutely, and we were ready to go. So we were doing $3 million per year.
And that's just money that you lost?
Yes, but in addition to that, we raised out of that $3 million, we raised money for the city because they get not only sales tax, they get a percentage of our sales, and they get rent. And last year, the city would have gotten $800,000 if that location had been able to open.
I think we have some footage of your spot. Is there anything you think that might have caused them to say, we don't think you're the right owner, the right operator here? Noise, unruly behavior? I
started to speculate because it took a year for them to look at this. I'm like, something's wrong because this is taking way too long. So I called the alderman's office, who immediately responded saying, no, you had no more complaints than anybody else, meaning we had fewer. So I can't piece it together. We did an excellent job. I tripled my projections, what I thought we'd be able to do out of that tiny little patio. We tripled and we matched City Winery's numbers, which is phenomenal given the size of the space that we get to serve into.
I should, the last sentence of this statement they gave me said the city recommended that you schedule a debrief with the project manager for this RFP. Sounds like you've tried to do that.
Of course.
It hasn't worked.
Of course, no. They want to wait until everything's signed and delivered so that there's nothing anyone can do about it. But my point is there's no oversight. Who gets to challenge the decisions that the committee is making? It is subjective. Right? They're going to go through the application and are going to score it. So is that it? One score is higher than the other? What about all this tax revenue that's being lost? Even this year, there's going to be a significant loss.
All right, Robert Gomez, best of luck figuring that situation out. Thanks for coming and joining us. And that is our show. But before we go, I want to tell you that we want this show to be a two-way conversation. So send us your thoughts. If you like what you see, don't like what you see, let us know. Email us at parisonpolitics@fox.com. And as always, keep up with all the news you need to know at fox32chicago.com and the Fox local app where you can watch this show anytime. We will see you next time.